10 o'clock. So I suggest that we start this webinar. I can see that my colleague Alistair also joined. So please, Alistair, if you've got any comments, additions, feel free to join the conversation. Obviously.
Thanks, Ewan. I was going to try and not steal your thunder today.
We welcome to. No worries, no worries. Cool. So the webinar of today is about adding audits and incidents into your BowTie's in BowTieXP. So what I'm going to do is I've got a little presentation with a little bit background on why you want to do this. And then I'll dive into the software to give you a few examples, and I'm using a working at height example to show audit results and to show some incident results onto a BowTie. Let me first start with sharing my screen. This one. Hey, Mark, good morning. Screen.
Okay.
Yeah, it says red, so you should be able to see it.
Yeah.
Cool. Slideshow. Yeah, so this webinar is about adding audits and incidents into BowTieXP. So it's a bit of a software-centric webinar, but still wanted to give you a little bit of background of why do you want to do this. And we'll start with a small video from the Buncefield accident a number of years ago. So these three questions are very important. When you do a risk assessment, you want to really check whether it actually works in practice as well. And so we built the software, the BowTieXP software, around these three questions. The first question: do we understand what can go wrong? That's the basic structure of the BowTie. That's thinking about the consequences, thinking about potential causes and everything. Second question is, do we know what the systems we have to prevent things from happening? That's basically a discussion on the barriers, whether it's mitigation barriers or prevention barriers, doesn't really matter. But we know they're there to stop consequences or top events from happening. But the third question, I find that question the most interesting question, is do we actually know what we thought of in practice in the BowTie workshops with all the experts? Do we actually know if it in practice really works, and the people on the sharp end, do they actually do what we've thought of in the office? So we want to have the assurance that the barriers we designed are actually working in practice. And in a lot of incidents, you see that it started with a design. We've got a BowTie, we've got a safety case and everything. But in practice, it just slightly works differently. And that piece of information is vital to have, because that is used to improve our safety in general. And so the third question, that's the most interesting question to me. So what kind of information do we have to make sure that the barriers actually work? Now, and in this webinar, we're going to look at two angles. is the first angle is how can we use incidents to give us feedback on barrier performance, and the other one is how can we challenge with audit questions, how can challenge the actual work that's being done to give some feedback on barrier performance as well. Now, a small definition of a barrier. Safety barrier, physical, non-physical means planned to prevent, control, mitigate undesired event of accidents. The reason why I want to show this slide is that a barrier is quite complex, and it involves hardware, it involves people, it involves culture, it involves everything. And in order to fully comprehend how a barrier works, and if it actually works, we need to do a deep dive into the barrier itself. And by using audits, incidents, we want to ask the right questions to the organization to get a feel of how barrier actually function. And we can make a relatively easy to make a bow tie, but it's harder to fully comprehend what's going on in the organization and what are the factors that influence the performance of the actual barrier itself. And once we know that, we can fully understand the risks we're taking as an organization. Now, what are the elements in a barrier? As I said, we've got technical elements in a barrier, we've got organizational elements in a barrier, and we've got operational elements in a barrier. And on top of that, a barrier needs to perform three things. It needs to detect something. It either needs to detect a top event or a consequence. It needs to act. So once something is detected, let's say a fire response system, it needs to detect the fire, it needs to detect the smoke, it needs to act. And then there's an operational element. It needs to put out the fire. So these three things need to be part of a barrier. And in order to fully comprehend the barrier, we need to fully understand these three different items. Now, an interesting part is, so we've got the barrier elements, we've got the performance requirements. So how do we actually know that the barrier works as designed? And how can we test that? And what are the KPIs we have, we can measure? And the interesting part is, what are the performance influencing factors? So what influences the barrier in a negative way? That's also good to question when you're doing a risk assessment. By the way, this comes from the PSA standard, petroleum safety in Norway. If you want to read it, it's a nice document to read. Now, what's an example, a simple example, the use of a fire extinguisher. The technical elements is the fire extinguisher itself. The organizational barrier element is we need to have a procedure to use the fire extinguisher. We need to have maintenance and regular checks to make sure it actually works. And the operational barrier element is the guy using the fire extinguisher. He actually needs to know how it works. Because if you don't know it, you're not able to extinguish the fire, obviously. Plus the maintenance engineer on sharp end, when he's checking the fire extinguisher, he needs to know what to check for. And so a simple thing like a fire extinguisher is relatively complex, which also means if we want to make sure this barrier is effective, and we need to look at the different elements in the barrier itself to check whether we do that or not. If we don't train people how to use the fire extinguisher itself can be pristine, but if people don't know how to use it, it's not going to be effective in case we actually need it. So coming back to the third question, do we have assurance if a barrier actually works or not? We need to look at the different elements in this case. Now, how we're going to do that? We've got two ways in the software. The first one is to ask questions on the barrier itself. That's called AuditXP. Now, how do we do that? You've got a traditional way of looking at audits. You can do a maintenance audit. Do we actually do the maintenance? Do we train people? But in a BowTie context, we make it barrier specific. So for a barrier, we'll look at the audit results itself. So we look at either whether a barrier is present, whether a specific activity for that barrier, if people are trained, if we look at the actual hardware, if it's maintained and tested. And then on the barrier level, we can actually see whether it actually works or not. And obviously, if we've got a critical barrier and we've got all red answers, that's a no-go, because that might mean that the barrier is not functioning as we thought it would be. Now, how does it look visually? It gives you a quick overview of how barriers are performing through the barrier, the questions we're going to ask. And clearly in this BowTie, you can also see, you can clearly see that we've got one barrier here, one mitigation barrier for this potential consequences. We've got red answers coming back from the organization. Now, this is a critical barrier. There's only one here, so we want to improve this one. Obviously, so we've got a problem here. The other way of retrieving data from reality is by using incidents. Now, obviously, if we have an incident, that means one or more barriers actually failed. And in Incident XP, we're able to make a link between the actual incidents and the barriers that broke and the BowTies itself. In that way, we get a good overview of the trends in barriers, which barriers are weak and which barriers are strong, by making the link between the incident and the BowTie itself. Now, what incident investigation methods do we use in the software? We've got four. We've got a D&V method called BSCAT, and I will show in the software how that works. We've got tripod beta, which is a shell-based method. It originates from shell. We've got barrier failure analysis, which is our own method. And we've got a root cause analysis, but that's not barrier-based. So I'm going to skip that in this presentation for now. Now, how does it look in the software? Are there any questions still so far, by the way? It's silent, so that's good. Yeah, I'm still, my internet connection is a little bit dodgy here in Portugal, but it still works, right? You can still hear me? Yeah, good. So, how does it work in the software? I'm going to use a working at height example we've built for a client. And the BowTie itself is working at height while accessing an offshore turbine, where we have on the consequence side, the person impacts, stranded at height, dropped objects, a person can fall in the water, etc., etc. And on the cause side, we've got presence of unprotected opening, which is, in this case, the main cause of incidents, people leaving hatches open, which can be very tricky if you don't fence it. Loss of structural integrity, human and physical factors, slippery conditions, work surfaces, and high wind conditions and sea sprays. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to start with the audit part first. So if we look at, for example, a barrier, the use of the fall arrest system and harness. In order to make this barrier work, thinking back to the barrier elements, we need to have the fall arrest harnesses. They need to be tested. They need to be certified. We need to train people. So those are all elements to make sure that the actual barrier functions. Now, in the software, and I think I've showed it last time, in the software, you can link those activities to the barrier itself. And you can find those activities under management systems. And under management systems, you can define your activities. So if you know the software a little bit, you can just drag and drop those activities onto the barrier and then show the activities on the barrier itself. Now, obvious reasons that we want to check this, whether we actually do it in practice or not. In the design phase of the bow tie, it's perfectly fine. We can come up with the activities, we can come up with the procedures, but what happens in reality might be different from what we've designed. It's in most cases, in most organizations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to define what we've called audit questions. And there's a tab called Audits in the software, and within those tabs you can define the questions, and you can define what we call surveys. And those surveys, we can send those out to all parts in the organization to fill in. Now, let's make an example here. So I've got an audit already ready called Working at Height. And within the audits, Working at Height, I can define questions, I can define surveys. So if you know the software, with the right mouse click, you can enter new questions. Now, when I do so, it gives me this window. I can leave the code blank. And the question would be, is there a part of the barrier itself, the use of the fall arrest system and harness? We've got a body check to check whether the fall arrest harness is worn properly. Now, the question could be, is there a buddy present? Is there always a buddy present? We can define different values of the answers. So we can say yes, no, but we can also work in percentages. We can say 100% of the time, 50% of the time, doesn't really matter, 0% of the time. And what we can also do is we can say, well, the first question, the first answer in the list is the positive answer. So that means it comes back green. Now, click on OK, I've defined this question. And again, you can drag and drop those questions onto the barriers. yeah, show them here. First aid training belongs there. So you can see we've got a set of questions now linked to this particular barrier. Now, in order to get feedback from people, we need to define surveys. Now, in the software, we've got a tab called Surveys. Make a new survey. There's called Working at Heights. Version 2.
Sorry, Jerome, can I?
Yes.
You always have it, you put for every barrier, you cannot just put this for one barrier, these surveys or questions, because when I drag, it appears in all the barriers. Have you understand what I asked for?
No, if you link it to a no, I don't understand. Sorry. No, you need to link a question
Okay.
to every barrier.
Okay. The maintenance systems appears for all ones, or also I can drag just for one barrier.
No, you can just drag it to one barrier.
Okay.
Yeah.
I probably made something wrong here.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think what you need to do, you need to make it very specific.
Okay.
A generic maintenance question doesn't provide you the right feedback, I would say. So you need to ask specific questions per barrier.
Okay.
Yeah. So in this survey, we need to select the questions we want answers on. So the questions are defined in this step. So we can say, well, I want this question to be answered, this question to be answered, and yeah, let's make this question as well. And now I've defined a survey, and that survey I can do a few things with. But what I'm going to show you is an export. So I can export it to an Excel sheet, and I can send that Excel sheet to different people. And as you can see, but it goes a little bit too far for this presentation. I can also link organizational units to my questions. So if you have an organization with multiple sites, for example, you can send out one survey and the multiple sites return that survey, and you can actually do a nice comparison between sites. So in a big organization, that's quite handy to have because you can actually learn from each other as well. So if people do things right, we want to know that too. And you can use this AuditXP for a good comparison between sites as well. Now, I'm going to start with the export. Yes, and it just spits out an Excel sheet with those questions. Now, within this Excel sheet, I've got a drop-down menu, and I can fill out those answers, and I can put in some remarks as well. And when I save this, by the way, this is what I'm showing here is desktop software, so it runs on the laptop, but there's server software as well, so you can actually fill out the questionnaires online too. But that's outside of this demonstration for now. I'm going to save it on my desktop. And when I'm ready, I can import the fill outs here. Make sure I pick the right one. Yes. And you can already see that the answers are filled in with color codes. So you can see the negative answers right away here. Now, in the software, we've got filters. So when I turn on my audit filter, it shows the audit results I've just imported into the software. Click on this one, and you can actually see the red and the green answers coming back. So if this is a critical barrier and everybody comes back with negative answers, do we do the yearly first aid training? It's all negative. We definitely want to work on this particular barrier. So that's in short how we do audits. So you can define your questions, you can define your surveys, and when you import your surveys back, and you can show the results on the barriers itself. It works relatively easy. And you can start with the questions, is a barrier present? But you can also do a deep dive on the barrier element itself. Do we have the procedures? Do people know the procedures? Are people trained? Etc. etc. So you can go as deep as you want. When you start with bow ties, the first question would be, is the barrier present? Especially in a multi-site environment, see a lot of companies that are not completely aware of whether barriers are present on different sites because of the age of the installation, for example. And newer installations have different barriers than older installations. This way is a good way to assess the status of barriers in different sites. So this is one way to gather feedback from how we do things in an organization. The other way is by looking at the incidents itself. The incidents, we've got an incident tab here in the software. I'm going to just shut off some things here in the software to make it a little bit more visible. So I'm back to my bow tie again. So what I can do, once you have an incident, for example, working at IT incident, you can actually do the incident analysis here. So I'm going to make a new incident, again with the right mouse click, create a new incident. All from height version 2. And as you can see here, I can select one of the incident analysis methods. I'm going to choose BFA, barrier failure analysis. And it goes a little bit too deep to explain all the different methods in here. But I'll show you BSCAT because it comes with indicators. It's a D&V method and comes with indicators as well on the root causes. So it's actually nice to have to do some trend analysis. But in this case, I'm going to do a BFA. So what I can do now, so I can start to do a analysis not linked to a bow tie, and I can do analysis directly linked to a bow tie. So person falls on floor. Now, what was the event before that? Person loses balance on scaffold. And here you can define barriers in between. Now, what I'm going to show you, I'm going to delete this. is because we already have this working at height bow tie, it's way easier to start from the bow tie itself instead of doing a free form analysis. Here we've got a button where I can import events from a bow tie. In this file, I've got one bow tie here, the falling from height. And when I click on this, you can actually see that it shows me the consequences, it shows me the causes. So I can start, for example, directly from a consequence. A person impacts neck, that was the consequence I was talking about. And as you can see now, if I hover over this element, you can see this little bow tie icon. And this bow tie icon, if I click on that, it actually brings me the top event from this particular bow tie. Now click on the top event, it automatically populates this consequence string. So with all the barriers that we've defined in the bow tie. Now, because I'm doing an incident analysis, you can see I've got holes in the barrier, which means that automatically the barrier failed. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be, obviously, because we can still have an incident where a person falls, but we can have a first aid that worked perfectly. So I can say, well, in this particular incident, we call those control states. In this particular incident, the apply first aid actually was effective. So we were able to treat the person quite well. Now, if I do this, you can see that the barrier actually changes and the hole disappears. Now we've got different barrier states. So let me show that again. Now we've got the failed barrier, which actually means that the barrier was present but completely failed. We've got what we call a missing barrier. So it should have been there, but it wasn't there. We've got an unreliable barrier, which means the barrier sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. We've got what we call the inadequate barrier. And an inadequate barrier means that it wasn't able to stop or mitigate a consequence entirely. So to give you an example is if we've got a big fire, we can have a fire extinguisher, but it's not adequate enough to put out the fire. It's just too small. And obviously we've got the effective barrier. Now in this case, I'll show you the missing one. Looks like this. So it's valuable information to get to improve your actual risk assessment itself. Now, I've selected an incident analysis method. It doesn't really matter what kind of method it is, but you want to do a root cause analysis on the actual barrier itself. All the methods have some kind of root cause analysis. 3 levels deep, and you want to go down to the actual root cause itself. In this case, with the barrier failure analysis, I can add what we call a causation path, which means I can enter a primary cause, a secondary cause, and a tertiary cause. And this level is the level of management systems, right? So if you solve this problem, you avoid repetition, hopefully avoid repetition of incidents. Now let's say the use of one of the lines broke. Because there was wear and tear. And the management system, we don't check our harnesses enough. Click on OK. You can actually see that you've got a mini root cause on this particular barrier itself. Now, what we can do now is, and obviously we can go further into the causes. And the guy fell because there were slippery conditions. It was raining, whatever. So in this case, we've done a complete incident analysis on this particular incident. Now, what I can do now with the software is when I go back to my BowTie itself, and if I go back to the filter, I can turn on what we call the incident filter. And this gives you a nice way of looking at the BowTie. You can see that it starts counting. So I've already added a few incidents here, and it starts counting the number of failures. So in this case, this particular barrier failed 100%. So in 3 out of 3 incidents, the barrier failed, which is a pretty bad sign, I would say, because it's a critical barrier. Now, if I now overlay the audits as well, you get a filter like this. So the audit results actually tell me sort of the same. I've got a few reds here. In incidents, it fails 2. So that actually means that I need to pay attention to this particular barrier. And any questions still so far? It's really high level. I realize because there's a lot of information to be said in 1 hour. But does this resonate with people?
Just have one question. Can we select not the BowTie symbol? What if we have some of the threads which are not present in our BowTie model, and we found out?
So if you don't have the threads in your BowTie model, you can still work on the incident analysis itself. So I can add and to show you how that works. So I can still add new events that are not in the BowTie. But that also means that I need to adjust my BowTie afterwards. So I clearly missed out a thread while building the BowTies. So yeah, it's for me a signal to work on to readjust the BowTie itself.
Amazing, thanks.
Yeah. By the way, if you have a free-form incident analysis diagram, you can also link barriers to a BowTie as well, to barriers in a BowTie. So I'll give you an example. So I've just created a new event, a new cause that was not part of a BowTie. I'm going to add a broken barrier in this case. So this is a new barrier. It's not present in a BowTie yet. What I can do is I can link this barrier to a control in a BowTie. So I've got this little tab here called controls. And when I click on this, you can actually see that the working at height bow, you can see all the barriers that are present in this working at height BowTie. So I can link this barrier to one of the barriers in the BowTie itself. Let's pick this one for the example. Click OK. Yes. So here you can see the link between the barrier in the bow tie and the barrier in the fill barrier in the incident analysis diagram. And when I now go back to my bow tie, I turn on my incident filter, and it doesn't show that. Why is that? Which one did I select? No, it doesn't show that. I don't know why. Don't know why. Where's my diagram? Here it is. Alistair, why doesn't it show? Do you have any idea? What am I doing wrong here?
Sorry, I'm on my phone, so I'm struggling to see what you're doing.
Oh,
what is it we're trying to do, Jerome?
No, so what I'm trying to do is I've linked this incident barrier to a barrier in the bow tie itself. And I want to show it on the incident filter, but doesn't.
Oh, but is that a new branch? Have you created a new line?
Yeah, I've created a new branch. Yeah.
So presumably, if the barrier isn't in, the main body, or the software can't link the barrier that you're trying to track into the main block.
Oh, here it is. No, I've got it. Sorry.
Oh, it is there. There you go.
Yeah, it is there. Yeah. Because it fills 3 out of 3 and the rest fills 2 out of 2. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, this one is correct then. Cool. So this is the way to link incident analysis with the bow tie itself. Let me just show you in a more extensive example how it then looks. So we've got an example which is in the software in the test file itself. It's a bit more populated than the example I'm using here. So if I now switch on my incident filter and my audit filters, you get a picture like this. Which looks really neat, I would say. And this is an interesting one, for example. We've got our incident analysis say that it filled 100%, 2 out of 2 in this case. And my audit results all show green. And this little number here is the number of answers that we retrieved back from the organizations. So clearly the organization thinks the actual barrier works, but if it's tested in an incident, it fails. So perhaps we're talking about the paper reality here and the actual reality here. It's a nice thing to think about, I would say. Now, one thing I wanted to show you, we've got all sorts of reports behind it. And obviously you can find your reports here. So you can run a report, for example, on incident diagrams or per diagram or incident itself. As you can get all sort of information out of the software too. I'm a bit. I think I've showed everything I wanted to show for now. Any questions?
Yes, one, sorry.
Yeah.
For the action, can the action be shared by multiple people? And does the view on the action could be shared to multiple people?
Yes, of course. Yeah. So you want if you want to add actions to barriers, and we've got this action sticky note, and we can say, well, fix this barrier. You can assign a due date if you want. Say next week. You can assign a sign-off date and a person responsible for this sign-off. You can click OK. Yes. So we can define all sorts of actions here. And in the case overview of the software, you've got a list of actions. And again, within the software, you can export it to an Excel sheet, for example. So you can share your actions amongst the organization.
Okay, thanks for the answer.
Yeah, now there's one thing I wanted to show you, so you're not able to your own. Sorry, I'm not entirely awake yet. So you can do incident diagrams, but you can also create a timeline in the software for the fact finding. And the timeline looks like this. So in the test file, you can design timelines, and the timeline looks like this, for example. So that's also a possibility for the fact finding itself, and you can use those facts in your analysis too. So it's quite comprehensive software. So this is a really quick overview of how to deal with the third question. How do we make sure that barriers actually work? Do we have the assurance that barrier is working in practice? One way is the audits, and one way is plotting incidents onto your BowTieXP to get the information out of the field. And then you can use that to start improving your risk assessment. So any questions left?
The actions which you just showed with the incident, can we add the same way of question for the negative answers during the audit and receive like a spreadsheet of actions followed up by the audit?
Say that again.
Actions which you just showed for the incident.
Yeah.
Can we use the same sticker note actions and then the spreadsheet of actions for the audit results? Or the negative, if we audited some of the barriers in a negative way, can we add actions and then make like an action list?
Yes, absolutely. Those are sort of universal actions. And so you can use those actions in the design phase of the BowTieXP. But you can also use those actions as sort of recommendations to implement after an incident or after you've done an audit and you retrieve negative audit results. Yeah.
Thank you.
One question. If I have the barrier or if the barrier is used in different BowTieXP scenarios and I do an audit, the audit is applicable for the barrier in all the scenarios or only for the one where I'm working?
That is all the scenarios. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions?
I just asked this question in the chat, like you showed us yes or no type of answers for the audit questions.
Yeah.
And can we use a Likert method, like very good, neutral, bad, or very bad, something like this one?
Yeah. It doesn't really matter. So you can define your own answers list. But you need to decide on which is the positive and which is the negative answer. Yeah, but this is a free text field.
I was going to add, Jeroen, that's the thing, is you have to define a neutral point, and then you can have anything. You could have 5 shades of positive with a neutral and 2 shades of negative, or vice versa. But once you go beyond simple yes and no, if you have 3 answers in there, it assumes the middle answer is neutral unless you tell it otherwise. So that's the only caveat to adding more detail. The key question I'd push back to you is, how do you define the difference between good and very good?
Yeah.
Is it some kind of like an empty string, or how to define the neutral, or some symbol to use?
Yeah, so if you have, let's say, for example, 5 answers, and you can use a symbol to define what is neutral and what's not, and you can actually shift that neutral around.
Okay, thanks.
Alistair, what is that symbol again? It's
the ampersand, the ampersand, the at signal.
Yeah. Any more questions? We're more than happy to do a deep dive. I realize in an hour it's not a lot of time, so it's a really high-level overview of the capabilities of the software. So if you're looking for a deep dive, more than happy to do so. No more questions? Cool. We've got some time left then. Cool. Now, I would like to thank everybody, and don't hesitate to contact us if you have questions or additional questions. More than happy to answer those. Yeah, and we'll share the presentation.
Jeroen, have we got any good practice that we've seen across our clients where some sort of tips and tricks to offer up to finish off with, to just say how this can be done really well?
Yeah, we have. And one of the examples is, for example, E.ON, where they implemented this system across I think 80 sites, and they started off very basic, because if you look at a company like E.ON, they purchased other energy companies, so they own assets that they're not really familiar with, and assets in different countries operated by different cultures. And that's a very interesting aspect. So what they've first done is they've defined 7 major hazard bow ties. So those bow ties, they thought they were the most important to assess, and they started off with what they call the presence question. And the presence question is, do you actually have this barrier or not in your facility? And surprisingly, some facilities did not have that barrier, which thought to be critical. So they actually used that to provide money to those assets to implement those critical barriers, and they've used this assessment to do so. Yeah.
But,
and we've got multiple clients using this concept.
But it's not specifically indicated in the audit which site been audited, or because I've seen only the number of the answers, not actually it's been done on the south or north or west, or for example.
This presumably ties in quite nicely, Jeroen, with the global and local concept as well. So if you have local bow ties, you can set up local questions, and then that audit is carried out at the local level.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Something else that's probably worth mentioning for the investigation, the incident side of things. It's called Instant XP, but it's not. It doesn't just have to be used for instant purposes. So when you become more familiar and confident with the tools, you start using it to track your incidents and occurrences that have happened. You can actually use it in some rather creative and useful ways to consider not just what has happened, but what could happen. So you can use it, for example, as a scoping tool for a change management exercise. Yep. You're about to go and start a new sector, a new area. You could use the instant tool if you wish to, as a means of looking at an existing BowTie, identifying what's going to change when you open up a new site or open up a new area. Be careful, obviously, to make sure that that change management diagram that you're using instant for doesn't pollute your existing data by becoming an incident that is then recorded in the main BowTie. But you can use it for that purpose as well, and you can use it as a wargaming exercise, as a tabletop consideration. So, let's run a scenario, put the BowTie in, build an incident diagram live with people looking at it, and then have them come back to you and say, right, what would happen in this scenario? So you can use it as kind of a consultative workshop tool as well.
True. Yeah.
Loads of really good things you can do beyond just thinking about instances. You can use this as a tool for examining your BowTie, in reality, in effect.
Yeah, true. Yeah, no, absolutely. I know companies that use the triple beta method to do a proactive analysis, risk analysis too. It gives you a lot more freedom to build diagrams. Because BowTie can also be sort of restrictive in the beginning with the center knot and the top event. So yeah, people use that to just as a brainstorm tool to describe all potential scenarios. Yeah. Cool. Now. Sorry for my voice. This little cold is blocking my voice a little bit. If you do have questions, give a shout. We are more than happy to help out. We're going to share the information and the presentation. And please look for the upcoming webinars. We do a monthly webinar. So have a look at our LinkedIn page for the upcoming webinars and training sessions, obviously. So cool stuff. Yeah. Thanks, Isaac, for organizing this and hosting it. And hope to speak to you all very soon.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.